So I am actually going to turn it over to Sally right now, who's going to take a moment to kind of describe and share with you our purpose for coming together today and what it is that we're going to accomplish during this time.
Well, welcome. We're so happy to have you guys here. And Scott was joking, we're not going to be here for 5 hours. This is only for 4. So we'll get you out of here before you know it. We are excited to talk to you about the waiver that was passed last month or this month? What month? Yeah, this month by the State Board of Education. And so we just wanted to start by focusing on the purpose of that waiver program. And this is really because we're in some unprecedented times, as we have said many times in the last 12 months. And specific to the fact that our students are dealing with some things that are way beyond their control, that are impacting and affecting their ability to graduate on time. And so the program is designed, there's 2 steps to the process, and Alyssa and Linda are going to get into greater detail about that, but designed to allow districts to have that authority in order to review student by student individual circumstances of where our students are and demonstrate some flexibility to help make sure that they're able to get graduated on time. So we really just want to center this and just remind ourselves that this is about the students that we are serving, and making sure that those students have the information that they need about the waiver program, how it impacts them, what are the pros and cons, the resources they need to overcome any of those barriers, whether that is extra adult support, opportunities to pursue and meet their requirements in a variety of ways. And just make sure that they're able to get to where they want to go. So Scott, I'll pass it back to you.
Perfect. Well, thank you for that introduction there, Sally, in terms of what's grounding us in our time together this afternoon. And what we wanted to do was kind of set the foundation for what has already transpired. And so in doing that, we wanted you to really begin to think about last year. So thinking back to 2020, and the whole process that you went through last year in terms of the waivers and the rulemaking and everything that was associated with that. The question we want to ask and allow you to just spend a little bit of time in a breakout room describing an answer to this is exactly this. What worked really, really well in the implementation of the waiver process last year? Because if it worked really well, it'd be a great thing to share with others. But more importantly, it'd be really great moving forward to do one of those things again. So we'll put you out into your rooms gently and pull you back in after about 5 minutes or so, where you again just talk about this question about what worked well last year. All right. Well, hopefully you made some new friends, and rather than saying welcome back, I'm going to say Shazam. That's what I learned yesterday with the group, because I've been saying welcome back for about a year, like I'm happy that you came back. But hopefully you heard some wonderful things from your colleagues. And as people continue to populate the Hollywood squares here, you were able to share a couple of examples of things, that just worked well last year. And we wanted to take you back because last year was such a time, obviously, and things did work well amidst all the chaos. Things did work well. And as we go forward this year, we also thought it would be a good idea for us to spend just a moment looking at some of the data from last year, who accessed the waivers and how that looked. So as you recall, last year was the first year of graduation pathways as well, House Bill 1599. And this is data from across the entire state where you see out of all students, just about 67% of students completed both an ELA and math pathway. And as you work from left to right, you see that, and then 74% or above completed any pathway. Well, as you continue to go across on that, you'll notice on the far right-hand side where the red box is around it, that is the percentage of students that accessed the COVID waiver last year that the State Board of Education had the rulemaking authority around, where we gathered input on all those different definitions. So when we look at the total number 3.9% of the graduates across the state accessed and utilized one portion of the ability to waive a credit last year. Not gain credit, but waive a credit.
And then the second slide has the same data, but shows it broken down by our various student demographic groups. For the most part, you can see that the accessing of the credit waiver that was available last year through emergency rule, it was, for the most part, relatively balanced across student groups. All student group was 3.3, and it was anywhere from, it looks like, about 2.9 up to 4.8 for our English language learners. One thing, and Linda and Alyssa are going to talk about this in greater detail, though, one thing that was different last year is the class of 2020 was the last group of students that were able to access the expedited assessment appeal. And that went away with the class of 2020, but this waiver is going to look a little bit different this year. So if a student did not pass the SBA in their sophomore year in ELA or math, there will be some additional options in order to meet the graduation pathways requirement that we have in place. And you can see that through the assessment appeal that was utilized at significantly different rates depending on student group. All right, and so you have met Scott and I. Scott is with Principals Association, and my name is Sally McNair, and I work at WEA's Center for Education Quality. We are really, really excited to be partnering today with Linda Drake, who is the State Board's Director of Career and College Ready Initiatives, and Alyssa Mueller, the State Board's Policy Manager for Career and College Readiness. And so they were a part of the process, start to finish, for crafting these rules, collecting community input on the rules, updating and revising it, working with the board through their process to adopt them. So we are just really appreciative to have their expertise here, and I'm going to pass it over to Linda and Alyssa, and hopefully Alyssa's internet holds up for her.
Thank you, Sally and Scott. Let's see, let me just dive in here. So next slide, please. So this next slide just is to remind you that there are sort of three parts of the high school diploma: the high school and beyond plan, the credit and subject area requirements, and the graduation pathway options. And I think the graduation pathway options are the newest requirement, and they were really disrupted by the COVID emergency because of this assessments as part of the graduation pathway options, and the assessments, of course, have been really compromised in the ability to be administered. Most of them haven't been. Also, this slide shows the statutory purpose of the high school diploma, and I just wanted to emphasize that because despite all the challenges that we faced in the last year, this is still intended to be the purpose of the high school diploma, and the emergency waiver was kind of designed to try and honor this purpose and keep it in place despite all the challenges our students have faced and that we educators have faced as well. This just shows the credit and subject area requirements. The ones in yellow, of course, are the core or foundational credits, and the ones in the blue there are elective or flexible credits that include the three personalized pathway requirements. And this shows the graduation pathway options, and there are 8 of them in total, but many of them do have an assessment or an assessment component, and the assessments in particular were very disrupted by COVID. And then this just shows the high school and beyond plan. Again, the high school and beyond plan is not waivable under the emergency waiver. So the credit and subject area requirements are the graduation pathway requirements are, but we actually rely on the high school and beyond plan to make the waiver individualized for students, so that in choosing whether the waiver is awarded and choosing what is actually waived, we rely on the high school and beyond plan. I'm not going to go over this timeline in detail. The main point here is that what was just approved was the emergency rules for the emergency waiver. There's a lot of emergencies going on here, but the emergency rules were done on a very short timeline so that they could be applied to the kids graduating this year. So the class of 2021 and students who are in the class of 2020 who haven't yet graduated. So the emergency rules, the way the bill was written, it was just specifically for those two classes, the classes of 20 and 21. Now there's a lot of concern for kids in later classes from 22 and 23. The board is going to consider that in permanent rulemaking that will extend from May through July. So the permanent rules will deal specifically with the class of 2022 and may also deal with the class of 2023. We're not quite sure yet, but for sure there'll be some flexibility that will be addressed in permanent rules to be adopted by the board in July. But for now, we're just focused on the emergency rules. The rest of the presentation is focused on the emergency rules, and that is just for the class of 20 and 21. All right, and I think I'm turning this over to Alyssa at this time.
Good afternoon, Alyssa Muller. Can y'all hear me okay? I just want to verify that hopefully the internet connectivity got solved. Great. I see some nodding. So these four concepts that you see on the slide come from engrossed House Bill 1121, and they're defined in the definition section of the State Board of Education emergency rule. And these are the most important terms from the emergency rule, and we'll be explaining the concepts during our presentation today. And so I did just want to note, you'll see colored boxes on some of the slides that summarize some of the terms you'll see on that slide. So there are quite a lot of similarities from last year's emergency waiver program to this year, but there's some key differences too. School districts still apply to the State Board of Education for the authority to grant emergency waivers to eligible students on an individual student basis after a school district makes a good faith effort to help students meet the requirements. School districts still have responsibilities to communicate with students and their families about the emergency waiver program and to administer the program in an equitable manner. However, I would note that this year's legislation, and so SBE rule as well, has greater record keeping and reporting requirements than last year's legislation and program. One of the biggest differences in this year's emergency waiver program is that the key terms have changed because of the way that this year's legislation is different. Last year, there was the concept of on track to graduate, which made more sense when students only had 3 months of their education impacted. This year, there are two components to being an eligible student for the emergency waiver program. The student was reasonably expected to graduate in the year the waiver is being considered, and the student has demonstrated post-secondary preparation for their plans as described in their high school and beyond plan. This year, there is also more definition on what credits can be waived. Additionally, now that the expedited assessment appeal has expired in law, this year's emergency waiver program permits the waiver of the graduation pathway requirement as well. And I'll be diving into all of these concepts more in subsequent slides. So the State Board of Education developed a survey to help inform the key decision points in rule. And I note that because the majority of survey respondents were school staff. So thank you to any of those on the call who shared your feedback with us while we were developing the emergency rules. The feedback from the survey and our other meetings with stakeholders helped inform the emergency rules that state that students in the class of 2020 and 2021 can graduate with no fewer than 20 credits, and that only 2 core credits with only 1 in each core subject area can be waived. The rules state that before using the emergency waiver program, districts shall consider using their existing authority to waive credits. And particularly, we mean waiving local graduation requirements if those go beyond the state minimum graduation requirements, as well as using the 2 flexible credit waiver for individual student circumstances. We have gotten some questions about if school districts have a higher requirement, a credit requirement than the state. So if a district has, for instance, a 26 credit graduation requirement, Can they waive 6 credits? And so the answer is yes, as long as students earn a total of at least 20 credits, and only 2 of those are done through the emergency waiver program. And then the other credits that are waived are done through district's existing local authority. The State Board of Education has also heard from school districts that they have had a harder time providing access to the graduation pathway options for students during the coronavirus disruption than the subject area requirements. After a school district has made a good faith effort to help an eligible student meet the requirement, the student's graduation pathway requirement can be waived. So in a school district's application to the SBE for authority to grant emergency waivers on an individual student basis, school districts must certify that they will administer the emergency waiver program in an equitable manner. Districts must provide individual student advising to help each student determine what supports they need to be successful, how they might meet the graduation requirements, including the feasibility of a summer term or an additional year of high school enrollment, and whether the emergency waiver is appropriate for the individual student. School district policy should also prioritize student completion of core coursework and the coursework that is related to the individual student's high school and beyond plan. Additionally, school districts are required to document actions taken under the good faith effort to help the student meet the requirements in the individual student record. Some examples of good faith efforts for helping students meet their requirements include provision of additional academic supports to aid student completion, mastery-based crediting, dual credit programs, and any other local credit options for awarding credit outside of school. The rules must also certify, school districts must also certify that they will maintain records and request data as required by legislation and SBE rule. I would also note that the Washington State School Directors Association has developed a model policy to help school districts with implementation of the emergency waiver program. Before granting any emergency waivers, the school district board must adopt by resolution a plan that describes their process for granting and declining emergency waivers for students. The plan must include a process for school district staff to initiate a waiver and a process for students to request a waiver if not initiated by the district. If an initial decision is made to decline a waiver for an individual student, a process must also be laid out for further review and recommendation by a panel with at least one counselor and educators with relevant expertise. The school district plan must also include a process for students to appeal within the school district a decision to not grant an emergency waiver and culturally responsive ways based on the school district's local community to communicate with students and families about the waiver and the process to request, appeal, or decline the waiver. Next slide.
Alyssa, oh, I'm sorry. I thought we were going to head to the next slide there. And there's a couple of questions that came in that relate to this slide. I wanted to be sure to get those answered here before we moved on. And one of them is in regards to some districts award competency credit based upon smarter balanced assessments. So they'll go back and award credit for classes like ELA 9 or 10. In absence of those, is that something? How are those credits impacted by the COVID closures if they intended to award competency credits via that process?
I want to make sure I'm understanding you correctly, Scott, but I would say that absolutely, if districts have a process in place to award mastery or competency-based credit, that's definitely the first choice for the students to get the credit, right? The emergency waiver should be a last resort option. Am I answering your question?
Yeah, it's really, it also goes to the lines of, since they may not have access to the smarter balanced assessment to gain the competency-based credit for their ELA 9 class that they took a couple of years ago or 3 years ago, would that fall under the guidance or the rulemaking process that yes, we could waive that because of the closure, we were not able to administer the smarter balanced assessment?
I'm looking at my colleague here. I don't know that we've thought about it. Of course, we knew that there would need to be some waivers of graduation pathway options because we haven't been administering the SBAC. But as far as awarding credit that students might have gotten for 9th grade that they didn't get because of not taking the SBAC, but that 9th grade happened before the coronavirus disruption. The emergency waiver is really intended for impacts of coronavirus disruption. So I'm thinking, I see the correlation there about they would have gotten the credit through SBAC probably. Linda, what are you thinking? I'm having to think about this. We haven't thought about it in that light yet.
Maybe while Linda is processing that, I can take a stab at, because we had a question in regards to good faith effort. And if I heard you correctly, that really the good faith effort is just as long as the district and the school and or the students feel as if everything has been exhausted to have the student meet the current graduation requirements, but was unable to do so, and that's where they might be granted access to the waiver. But really, that's determined by the school and the counselors and the administrators and the families to say, all right, we did everything we possibly could. This is our last resort to utilize the waiver.
I think that that's right. As long as, again, it's ultimately the student and the family's decision, right? So if the student wants to come back for another year and they want to decline the waiver, if that's appropriate, certainly. So whatever is in the student's best interest, the student was provided all the supports they possibly could have by the district to meet the requirements, they weren't able to. And it makes sense based on what their plans are in their high school and beyond plan for post-secondary to waive, a credit or two, then yes, I think that's absolutely appropriate.
I would also say for good faith effort, it's probably something you've been doing all along, all this year, because your educators have been trying to get students to graduate without knowing for sure there would be a waiver program. So I suspect that almost all districts have been conducting a good faith effort, but it just means that you are doing what you can to provide options and for students to be able to meet graduation requirements.
All right, and I think, Jenny, that Linda put a link to the WASDA model policy. There'll also be a link in the slides that you can access those later.
If I might jump in, I'm seeing a clarification perhaps in chat about the previous question. So for instance, a student had a rough 9th grade year, but passed their English class, with high grades. I would note that the State Board of Education has mastery-based crediting rules. And one of the things that it says in mastery-based crediting rules is you can award credit, not just the SBAC, but say a student passes a higher level course. And especially in English where the concepts build on each other, right? And so they are past kind of the higher level learning standards. And I would say it is appropriate to award mastery-based crediting for the 9th grade course and not do it through the waiver, but simply award mastery-based credit if your district has adopted a mastery-based crediting policy, because clearly the student has demonstrated that they have mastery over those lower level learning standards. Does that make sense? I'm hoping.
And then there's an additional question about the role of the panel. If they are supposed to review each student's waiver or...
So the panel doesn't have to review every waiver decision. They do need to review any decision to decline a waiver. And I can provide a little bit of the State Board of Education's thinking here, because we talked to a couple of different student groups, and particularly they were students of color who were very concerned that if one person had responsibility around declining a waiver, what if that person didn't like this student? What if there was some implicit bias? And so students asked us, please make sure that any decision to decline a waiver is made by more than one person.
Right, and that was also echoed by educators who didn't want to be the one person making a decision. Right. So, but I would say that all the decisions to award or not awarded a waiver is a local decision.
Scott, are you signaling me to go ahead? We answer all the questions for now.
I think we're good. Yeah. We got through those, and I think we're good. And yes, there is Corey WASDA model policy for mastery-based credit stuff.
And I might just say, for anyone that has questions about mastery-based credit or mastery-based credit model policies, you're welcome to reach out to me directly, and I can send you links to those. I don't think we have them in these slides, but I'm happy to send them to you if you just shoot me an email. And Linda and I's information is on the State Board of Education's website, so happy to provide direct links if that's helpful. All right, so with that, let's see here. So regarding the district responsibility for communication with students and families, the school district needs to consult with the individual student and make a reasonable effort to consult with the student's family and provide information about the waiver and the preferred languages of the student's family. The information must include, but is not limited to, whether the waiver is appropriate for the individual student, and if so, then the school district shall advise the student to waive only those credits that are least applicable to the student's post-secondary plans as articulated in their high school and beyond plan. The information also needs to include any possible benefits and limitations that could result from receiving the waiver, including impacts on post-secondary plans, and if the student is planning to move on to either higher education or an apprenticeship, the recommendation to contact the student's intended post-secondary institution or apprenticeship provider regarding potential impacts. The student also must be provided the option to decline the waiver and to earn the credits needed or meet their intended graduation pathway option if they prefer to continue an enrollment beyond their planned graduation date. The waiver can only be granted to eligible students as defined in rule, and that would mean students who are reasonably expected to graduate this school year and who have experienced significant disruption to their ability to complete graduation requirements due to the COVID-19 emergency. Reasonably expected to graduate does include students who are planning to graduate this summer, as the school year is defined in law to end on August 31st. SBE has also defined post-secondary preparation in rule, but I would note that the language is not inclusive because in rule it states that the demonstration of post-secondary preparation could include, but is not limited to, the list of 11 examples. Local districts determine whether an individual student has demonstrated post-secondary preparation for their next steps as identified in their high school and beyond plan. Some of the examples listed in rule include if the student completed a graduation pathway option, if the student is a participant in a recognized apprenticeship preparation program or a registered apprenticeship program, or has signed an apprenticeship agreement with an employer, or if the student has earned college credit in a core subject area. School districts must also disaggregate waiver administrative data by student subgroups. If disproportionality is found, the school district will take appropriate actions to ensure equitable administration and consider if any changes to their approach to administering the emergency waiver program are needed before the conclusion of the school year. The rules also require school districts to keep a record of the number of waivers requested but not granted. Additionally, school districts must maintain a record of the following and the individual student record: actions taken under the good faith effort to help students meet their graduation requirements, courses including the term and amount of credit waived, and how the student demonstrated post-secondary preparation. The legislation also requires that a notation of the use of the waiver be on the student's transcript, and more transcript guidance will be forthcoming from OSPI. Districts report on the administration of the waiver program to SBE and then reports student level emergency waiver data to OSPI. We just wanted to note that SBE and OSPI have been holding joint office hours about the emergency waiver program, and will continue to do so over the next few weeks, every week, with the exception of March 31st, which is the OSPI WASAC webinar. And that webinar agenda includes an update from the state board on the emergency waiver program and then other information relevant to supporting seniors transitions out of high school. So this last slide just includes direct links to additional information on the emergency rules and a number of other resources, including FAQs and a one-pager on the emergency waiver program. And Linda and I are happy to answer questions on the emergency waiver program anytime. And I don't know, I'm looking at Scott and Sally. I don't know if we have time for more questions now, so I'll defer to them on that, but feel free to reach out over email anytime as well.
Yeah, Sally, yeah, we got time. Go ahead, Sally.
There was one question from Ginny about sorry. I think it's a distinction between last year when the expedited assessment appeal was in place and this year. So last year they were able to demonstrate acceptance into college to meet the SBA requirement. So is that going to be the same, Alyssa, or different from last year?
So in the state board rules for the emergency waiver program, because the expedited assessment appeal doesn't apply by law to the class of 2021, it wouldn't go through the OSPI expedited assessment appeal process, but we did include the criteria for the expedited assessment appeal in SBE rule. So all of that to say you wouldn't go through OSPI's process, but yes, college acceptance is one of the options or the examples included in SBE rule.
Do you know if anyone is, we have something that could potentially be built into a template, but is anyone developing a template to kind of work through the group process with individual students?
Beyond WASDA's model resolution, not that I'm aware of.
And then a final clarification or clarifying question was in regards to when it says 1 credit for core classes, is that a full credit or out of one area, or 0.5 credit from different core areas that could only equal one full credit?
Sure. So you can waive up to 2 credits of core credits. They could be 0.5 or a full credit, however the district decides, but the restriction is you can't waive, for instance, 2 math credits. You could waive 1 math credit and let's see, a CTE credit, for instance, out of core. I would note, particularly around math and ELA, our higher education institutions can get a little nervous about waiving the math and ELA caters particularly. There's some flexibility this year from our public institutions on caters, but I know that they have asked us to say, please contact, if a student, has been admitted to an institution, please contact that institution and just ask what possible impacts could be if a student is going to end up waiving core credits.
Right. And then one final clarifying question there is going back to when you talked about the expedited assessment appeal is not a part of this process, that they would typically upload like they've done in the past years, so on and so forth. This can be done at the local level if it meets the definitions that you stated earlier in regards acceptance into a post-secondary institution and a couple of the other items that were listed right here: completed graduation pathway and the other stuff, correct?
That's exactly right.
Okay. And they don't have to do anything with OSPI if a student demonstrates post-secondary preparation.
Right. They need to note it in the individual student record. So at a local level, they need to keep records, and then they will be reporting eventually, to be determined, student level data on the emergency waiver to OSPI, but not in advance like the expedited assessment appeal requiring approval. It's just after the fact reporting to OSPI and SBE.
Now, thank you. And I know there's a couple others in there that have been answered already by Sally or myself or Linda, as we've kind of been scouring through the chat as you presented some great information, Alyssa, that it's going to help all of our school leaders and counselors and teachers and other staff members kind of prepare in their understanding of this, but to be able to see similarities from last year and a few of the differences from this year moving forward. And one of probably the larger pieces or questions right now is, how do we begin to put this into practice at the building level? Now that you've seen what's the same and what's different and what you can do and maybe not do, and you think about the systems that you utilized last year, really it's something you've probably been doing this entire year. You've been tracking your seniors, you've been looking at schedules, you've been crunching the CIA, CAA reports, and you've been scouring through those to see who's met a pathway here and who's met a pathway there. You've brought kids into your offices and said, okay, we've got to get you into this class over here because it meets this pathway. It aligns with your high school and beyond plan. It's going to allow us to get your credits, and then we'll be able to matriculate out of here to your post-secondary pursuits. And you're going to be very happy to do that moving forward. But as we really dive in a little bit deeper with some of this stuff, as we get to the end right now, some of these questions to think about, tracking that progress, but how are you working with others in relationship to communicating these processes? Are you bringing your counseling team together and going through the list of seniors and looking at what's possible or probable for them? Are you doing that on a regular basis and having those conversations? And as Alyssa and Linda talked about, how is this being communicated out to families, and how are we engaging them in this process? So we wanted to use that as the backdrop and really begin to think about the equitable support. One of the pieces that you're going to have to track this year and take a look at is which students, and it goes back to the data that Sally shared earlier about the different student subgroups that accessed the waiver last year. And now that's going to be a part of the reporting practice or process this year. And really it's around this notion of, how do you begin to ensure, or what will you do right now to ensure equitable support of the graduating seniors? So we're going to think about that for a moment. And as you think about that and read some of the questions on the thoughts on the other side that Sally's going to take you through real quickly while I get some more breakout rooms created. because that's going to be the question you're going to have when you're out there. So Sally, can you just real quickly take them through the right-hand side there, please?
Sure, yeah. So what are the systems that we're putting in place that are working well to make sure that we're aware of the overall systemic progress that students are making? How are we identifying those individual students are paying close attention to whether or not there are subgroups of students that may have additional barriers that we need to provide more priority and time to them to ensure that they have the supports that they need to get ready to graduate. And then what are we doing on an individual student level to really be working with that student, to be thinking about how the waiver process might impact their high school and beyond plan, what are the pros and cons of taking advantage of that waiver if they're planning on going on to a 2-year or 4-year program, and making sure that their choices, what they're wanting to do, are honored, and that they have the full information of how those choices might impact their future.
All right, thank you, Sally. And as you go into your breakout room, again, think about what you will do to ensure equitable support for seniors. Well, I'm hopeful that as folks are rolling back in here and we come back into our larger place, that you stole some good ideas, or at least we're able to share a couple things out about equitable practices. My apologies to a couple of you. We've had people jumping in and out in the Zoom, and I know there were a couple of you that were in a room yourself. I tried to bounce you back into something there, and but thank you for your patience with all of that. Really, we wanted to again just give you a chance to communicate with each other and talk and share some stories. And if you had a great thing that you heard in your breakout room, feel free to share that in the chat right now. Because that might be great to begin to share with everybody else. So as I turn it back over to Sally here.
I know there was a question earlier about like a template or process. We put this slide together because we just wanted to have like a really quick view outlining the different parts of the high school graduation requirements, the high school and beyond plan, both the credit and course requirements, the pathways requirements, and then any local requirements. And I did want to acknowledge, I know that ratios of counselors to students at the high school are never enough. So I do want to acknowledge the comments in the chat about your caseload there. And just thinking creatively about how you work at it with the full team, if there's a way to I know everyone's plates are full, but if there's a way to create time in the classroom so students are getting the individualized attention, maybe you can bring in some of the core teachers to be helping with that process. But we just wanted to give you a sense of where there was flexibility in the 4 parts of the 3 to 4 parts of the requirements, and where there's not. With the high school and beyond plan for the class of 2021, this waiver doesn't include any flexibility. So all the students still have to meet the requirements of the high school and beyond plan. Remember that the verification that that plan has been met is determined at your local district level. So that those are district level decisions about what those requirements look like. And so really focusing on helping the seniors meet what those additional requirements at the senior year. There are existing flexibilities around both the credit and course requirements that Alyssa already spoke to. So the idea is that you would be looking at what are those existing flexibilities before you think about this emergency waiver. So both the 2 non-core credits, as well as flexibility for course completion of Washington State history and PE. Those aren't necessarily about the credit, but just waiving those course completions. And then after you do that, then you can start to look at the emergency waiver with the 2 additional credits. There was a question about the 26 credits. When you have more than the 24, those are because you might have additional credits available or required by local requirements. So any additional credits that exceed the 24 credits required by the state can be waived under local provisions if those are local requirements to add on those additional credits. So if you have 26, you could, the board could locally decide to waive those 2 additional above the 24, and then you could access the 2 non-core credits for individual students, and then you would be able to move on to the emergency waiver. So this is kind of this was designed kind of to be a template to help you kind of move through the 3 to 4 requirements of the diploma. And then for students with who are on with an IEP, who have a certificate of individual achievement, this is the class of 2021 will be the last class that has a CIA option available. And Linda and Alyssa, I'm hoping you guys will correct me if I say this incorrectly, because there were a couple questions about the WEA and the IEP team waiving the assessment requirement. I think the way I'm interpreting it, and jump in here if I'm getting this wrong, is that a good faith effort, we would want to ensure that that student has the opportunity to complete that testing. It would not be the role of the IEP team to waive the assessment. But if the assessment was not completed, for example, if the student was taking the Smarter Balance and wasn't able to complete that because of the pandemic, that then you could access the emergency waiver. But the IEP team itself wouldn't be waiving the assessment requirement. Does that align with how you guys would interpret it?
I think that's right.
Right. It's the pathway that can be waived. So
Yes.
the assessment pathway can be waived.
Thanks. That's a good way to put it. Not the assessment itself, but the pathway. All right. And then oh, you skipped a slide. That's why I'm off.
No, you're
Scott.
off. I just realized that. I was looking at the time and I forgot to tell you.
No, you made an executive decision.
We planned this out to the minute. So I'll go ahead and punt on this one, Sally. You've done a great job up until now. And so you rolled with those punches and I'm like, oh, I was supposed to do that last one. But I was looking at the time, want to honor that with everybody and see if there's any questions here at the end as well. And as you move forward and begin to answer the question, do we or don't we? Should we or shouldn't we? I think everybody has heard loud and clear that that to waive something is a very, very, very large decision, and to think about the conversations that you're going to have with the student and the family and who's going to be involved in those conversations, much like last year. The last thing that any of us want to do is have some unintended consequences 2 years from now or a year from now that the student finds out, that's not allowing me to do what I hoped I'd be able to do in my future. So again, it's a very, very large decision to extend this waiver to the students above what you can already currently do with those 2 credits that are non-core and elective type credits. So as you go through this and think about it, do these questions, as you're developing the procedures and policies and process and the system around this, really with that equitable lens, does this impact a student group greater than another student group? What are some things we could identify right now in the last month or 2 of school to where we can mitigate that impact on certain student groups that we have that you have in your building? And then just supporting those different subgroups, and getting them ready to graduate and move on. And then again, thinking about the policies and procedure that honor family and student choice. And this is what we talked about a little bit earlier, and I shared and understanding the implications of to waive or not to waive and what that can be like. We did have a quick scenario for you, but we're not going to go through that right now. And instead, we're going to kind of open things up at this moment. And really begin to just say thank you for the time today. But more importantly, if there are other questions, you guys have done a great job of putting those in the chat, and I think we're all caught up on those. I know there was one question from Candy Apple about the district requiring more components than the state in the high school and beyond plan. And this is similar to schools that have a culminating project still or that go above and beyond the required community service. The requirement is to complete the high school and beyond plan, and you know that the core requirements of what has to go in that high school and beyond plan. If your district requires more than that, if you wanted to remove some of those components, but not go below what is required at the state level and WACs and RCWs to be in the high school and beyond plan, that would be a local decision. And that would come as a board policy or a change in your local graduation requirements that are associated with the high school and beyond plan. But students still have to do one and meet the required guidelines and components to that. This might be a question to Linda and Alyssa before we wrap things up here. Are there any subject areas or core areas that cannot be waived?
There's a few that are mentioned in statute, and civics is mentioned in statute. So the civics requirement cannot be waived. So that may be embedded in your curriculum, or it may be a separate standalone course, but that you need to make sure that the student that you've addressed those learning standards with the student.
Great, thank you, Linda. And I'm glad I pitched that your way because I didn't know the answer. So I'm glad you're here. And there's a couple other little items about there. And while I'm navigating through the chat here, the question about Washington State history, and I know you spoke about that earlier, but it could have been somebody that joined a little bit later. So could you, Linda and or Alyssa, address Washington State history one more time for us?
Well, yeah, that's sort of like civics in that it is mentioned in statute, but we did also put a provision in existing graduation requirement rules that the credit for Washington State history can be waived. So that's under existing rules that isn't part of the emergency waiver.
All right. And the one final question, just kind of taking us back there, acceptance into a local community college or a four-year school or whatever that is sufficient evidence for demonstrating post-secondary readiness. And the school can determine that given their own internal system, and a student would be able to graduate because they've demonstrated that post-secondary readiness. You don't have to have completed FAFSA, even though every single senior in the state of Washington should complete the FAFSA. Please, thank you. Please, thank you. Please, thank you. Or AccuPlacer scores are not anything part of that. If they've got acceptance, they're good.
And then Scott, we have emails right through the registration process to get slides to people directly. Is that correct?
I'm going to say yes, Sally. Yes. I'm going to say yes. So we do, and we'll get the slides out as quickly as possible. As soon as I learn how to download emails from Zoom and make that happen. So they'll be coming sooner or later. And we will stick around here, and Kim will get your question answered here soon. I want to honor the time, but I know I extend a note of gratitude and thanks to both Linda and Alyssa and Sally for the enormous amount of time that they have put into creating this stuff, and especially Linda and Alyssa and the work that the state board has done. They've been more than inclusive and more than open to hearing the stories of students around the state and to letting us have input into this very, very important process. So I don't want to steal the thunder from Sally, Linda, or Alyssa, but I know I just wanted to say thank you to everybody. And we will stick around here to answer some questions individually if you need to.
Can I also just say, from a State Board of Education perspective, y'all are the ones doing the hard work with students every day. So we want to extend our thanks to you. We know you must be exhausted. And just so you know, every single one of State Board of Education staff and board members know how hard you're working.
Yes, and thank you for having us here to be able to share this information. And I'm willing to stay around too if there are questions. Can I do a clarification on Washington State history? I kind of bumbled that a little.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah, please, because that's one of the questions that's coming right here. That was the first one. Kim, we got you covered.
So Washington State history, it is mentioned in statute, but it doesn't have to be a credit requirement. It still doesn't have to be a credit requirement. So the credit may be waived But I think you still are obligated to try and get the learning standards to the student if possible, if you can. And the same with civics. The learning standards should be addressed somehow, but the credit can be waived.
I'm a little confused because Washington State's history, as you said, was a standards, and on the transcript, it's, you know, at the bottom, it says Washington State history met or not met. Civics is now, according to the new law for the class of 2021, was a credit bearing standard. And so is it the standard that we're not waiving, or is it the credit that we're not waiving? I'm sorry to be so nitpicky.
No, it's a really good question, and I know I'm not sure
Because
I really thought about it. So it's a really good question.
Because it is new for the class of 2021.
Yeah.
And I have 3 seniors who did not pass it trimester 2.
Mm-hmm.
And if I can't waive it, I've got to figure out how to show standard met, because I'm already 10 days into try 3.
I think I'd better get back to you, and I shouldn't speak to it
Okay.
right now. So let me.
Kim Casey, Grandview High School.
Sorry, Scott.
Oh, no, that's perfect, because I was thinking the same thing when I heard it. I was like,
I think a lot of us need
okay.
that.
So
Yeah,
yeah,
that would be,
I'll look into this, and I
holy
will.
cow,
And I'll
the
let you.
chat just blew up. We're gonna have to send that out to everybody because the chat just blew up. Could you send that to me too? Can you send that to me too?
It might be clarifying, like through one of the OSPI or the state board, you know, the Q&A things, maybe something that can go out that way. That could be, because the civics was new for some of us anyhow. We'd covered it, you know, under class, and now that it's a standalone class requirement and it's not listed in the statute. So, I mean, it's not listed in the waiver, but I didn't think it wasn't not listed. I mean, it wasn't available. Originally, I thought it could be one of the core credit waivers, like English or math. And then when you said the word about the statute, then I got worried, and that's what caused the piece.
Yeah, and
because it's considered a core class now. And so.
Right. So I'm thinking I need to check on the wording of the bill that gave the authority to the state board, whether that encompasses everything, including previous subjects that were in statute. So I'll look into that, and I will give an answer to Scott and Sally.
And we will send that out with the PowerPoint slide or the slide deck that I'm going to learn how to get emails from out of Zoom. If anybody knows how to do that, I'll stick around and get tooled up by you. Okay? I'll get coached up by you if you know how to do it.
I have a question.
Yeah, shoot, Keisha.
No, I'm not Kesey. I'm Jamie Woodard.
Oh,
she sent me the invite. Anyway, so the question I have is, we have a student that's cohort 2020. She has half a credit of civics left, and gosh, I can't remember the other social studies that she needs. Are we able to waive any of her social studies credits? Because from what I understand, it's cohort 2021 who needs to have civics. Oh no, you're quiet.
No, I was just, so I'm trying to, so if let me try and rephrase while Alyssa, Linda, and others kind of process here. So
this one is about what can you waive? Oh,
no, go ahead. So I was just gonna rephrase Keisha, not Keisha's, I'm sorry. Jamie, that's right. While they think, and it was really along the lines of, it's a student that was in the graduating class of 2020 that didn't matriculate through, came back and continued perseverance, good on them. And it still looks like they're not going to meet that half credit of history. And you're wondering, does that fall within the rules this year to be able to waive that for that student?
Right. Because we can waive one core credit, correct?
Correct. Yep.
Okay.
I would say
you can actually waive up to 2, but they have to be in different subject areas.
Different subject.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we could waive a 0.5 from the civics then?
Yep.
Okay, okay, thank you.
And then to Rebecca's question about civics, or doesn't mean either civics or Northwest history, if those are 1 credit total, like semester long courses, then you could waive both requirements, correct? They're both social studies.
Typically, civics is a 0.5 in conjunction with US history sometimes. I know, my apologies, I'm gonna maybe not pronounce
That's
your
okay.
first name correctly, DL. But in the chat there. So civics normally a 0.5, so it'd be okay.
Okay, so we can, so that student, she needs 0.5 of civics, and I think it's 0.5 of US history. So we can waive the 0.5 of civics. Can we also waive the 0.5 of US history, or it's one or the other?
We're getting clarification around the civics. For right now, you'd be able to waive the 0.5 US history for sure.
Okay,
And Alyssa and Linda are nodding their heads. So I was okay. Because I'm learning too. We're going to throw it to Jamie Tuff at Decatur High School because she had a question a second ago.
Up to 1.0, yes, Terry.
Jamie may have stepped away for a second. She got upset I cut her off when I was answering Jamie's question, darn it. The other Jamie.
Any
Well,
other?
keep them coming and go ahead. Other questions? Sorry, Sally.
Just asking.
I have another question. Sorry, this is Jamie again. So there's a couple of students, well, there's a few students who they've not met a grad pathway yet. And I know, and they're not cohort 2020, they're cohort 2021. So I know we can't use the EAA for them. The way I'm understanding for cohort 2021 is that the school has made a good faith effort to make sure the student has met a grad pathway. So for instance, if that student took like the SAT or ACT, but they still didn't meet the cut score, do we then at the district level have to, I guess, make a policy that says, okay, we can accept a college acceptance letter for that student? Is that what we have to do? Because we don't have EAAs for cohort 2021. Am I understanding that correctly?
So for the emergency waiver program as a whole, the district has to adopt a plan by resolution to implement the program. WASDA has a model resolution to help with the resolution piece of it. The resolution is very helpful, but the district would probably still need to build out a more comprehensive plan. All of that to say that, yes, your example is correct, that you could use college acceptance in that case.
Okay, after the student did not, let's say, make the 430 cut score for the math portion of the SAT, but they, showed up and they at least tried. And let's say there's no other options for them to meet their grad pathway because they don't have 2 credits to CT in one subject area. They didn't score 31 on the ASVAB. So then the district would just need to basically make a policy, put a policy in place that says if the student doesn't meet any of those grad pathway requirements for whatever reason, then we can accept an acceptance letter from a higher education institute.
I'm going to say that's correct. Alyssa, let me give it a shot here. I was going to say that is correct after you've gone through all that, but based upon, and this is my checking understanding, Alyssa, that's why I kind of wanted to answer this because I'm going to get a lot of these questions too. But based upon my understanding from earlier, you wouldn't need to have the district create a policy. If this didn't happen, this didn't happen, this didn't happen, we could accept post-secondary enrollment letters as a pathway completion, because that's already built into the rule process where acceptance into a post-secondary institution it's already available. You don't need a policy around that, correct?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right, Scott. And what I was going to say is, I think you're getting too buried in the details of what your policy needs to include. I would only have your policy include things that aren't covered in Board of Education rule. Otherwise, you're going to have a 50 policy, right? So don't do the 8 pages of State Board of Education rule in your policy. Just say, we'll follow the rules, and then here's our process for the things that aren't covered in the State Board of Education.
Great advice,
Okay.
Alyssa.
I have a question. Carrie Hollins. I just want to go back to the credits because I got a little confused by the last definition of that. My understanding is they can go down to the core 24. You can do the 2 credit waiver for elective, but where the new emergency waiver comes in is if we start waiving beyond that and including those core credits. And my understanding from what you said, I think, is that they can waive 1 credit of 1 subject area, but no more than 2 total credits of subject areas for that waiver. Is that correct? Okay. I just want to be sure.
Right.
So thank you. I've got a little confused there. I just want to make sure it was clear in my head. Thank you.
I think we may have it all for now. And don't forget, if you do get stuck, those office hours will be weekly, except for that one exception.
All right, I'm going back to my, see Kim, I'm going back to my teaching days where I could just wait time forever, so, but that's, sometimes it got me in trouble. So I was, oh no.
Linda and Alyssa, did we get any questions for you guys to add to an FAQ?
I think a lot of these are covered in our FAQ, but I think we've got a couple we'll add to the existing one. Yes.
And I'll save the chat because it even might be, there might be something that's there, and I'll send that out to you guys too.
Terry, I see your comment. I think it's just, this is really about the individual students, and we want to be like thinking about their, postgraduate plans and seeing how the parameters of the existing flexibilities and the waiver fits with what that student is trying to get done. So I know that's not always easy, but best of luck, in advocating for what makes sense for that student within the parameters.
All right, well, it's looking to me, in consulting with our other SBE staff, that civics and Washington State history can be waived. It has to be provided by this, according to the statute, it must be provided, but it may be waived like all the other subject area requirements.
So you have the opportunity to meet that requirement or whatever, and due to COVID closures or circumstance, whatever it is, they could access that and waive. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
One question I was thinking about, Linda and Melissa, as we were responding, so in regards to the pathways, if a student hasn't met like the SBA or ELA pathway, and their high school and beyond plan has nothing to do with the military, would the district still meet its good faith effort if they didn't say, oh, there's an opportunity to take the ASVAB, you should take that just for the sake of meeting a pathway requirement? Could you skip that step if it has nothing to do with their high school and beyond plan?
Yeah.
Okay.
I say yes. The pathway really should have to do with what the student wants to do.
Right.
And just so you all know, there is the PICAT, which is an online ASVAB option now. But the student can take it online at home, but then it does have to be verified in person at a MEPS. So for students that do want to go into the military, that is an option for meeting the ASVAB pathway.
And MEPS is Military Entrance Processing Station. So only a student who's really serious about joining the military should do the online option, because then you're working with a recruiter.
Yeah.
I guess my comment with the whole pathways is that not every district offers pathways for every student's post-school goals. And that's kind of the bigger problem, not for necessarily this conversation, but you know, I've got lots of kids with great post-secondary goals that we can't meet their quote unquote pathway. And being a special ed teacher, they're not going to pass an SBA, they're not going to pass an ASVAB, they're not going to in a couple of years be able to pass the off grade level testing is not going to be available. And so, I mean, emergency wise, yeah, this is going to be a good fix for right now, but it's still scary because I'm dealing with mostly seniors that I am scrambling with.
Especially with the CIA going away to
Yes.
secretary.
Yes.
And then Alyssa, what is the time frame for the pathways survey that the state board is doing?
You're reading my mind, Sally. I was hoping you'd let me plug this. So I was just going to say, so the state board has been tasked with doing research on the graduation pathways, and particularly if we need additions or modifications to any of the pathways. So anyone who's interested in participating in the graduation pathways survey or focus groups around the pathways, feel free to email me directly. I think, and I haven't said this to Sally or Scott yet, so feel free to kick me through the Zoom screen if this is inappropriate, but perhaps our AWSP and WEA partners would send out the survey for us and help us get some responses. But yes, we would love everyone's participation because we need to hear from the field about what we're missing. We know we probably are missing some pathways.
Yeah, we're totally missing special needs pathways. And I know that there are application processes that districts can go through. However, I don't know how, I mean, I'm sorry, I'm just a lowly teacher, 30 years in, but I'm not admin and they don't necessarily know the processes to do this. And I'm trying to get students graduated, and it's sad that students unfortunately have to kind of make a decision on what quote unquote pathway they need to do, when I think CTE and electives should be an opportunity for students to figure out what they might want to do instead of focus on what they think they're going to do. But again, not probably a conversation for this particular Zoom, and I really appreciate all this information. Again, I'll just look forward to seeing what my district does do. And
well, Terry, I would encourage you, and I can hear the passion in your voice for students and kids, and that's coming through loud and clear, and it's awesome. And you know, the whole notion of providing a sense of hope for them at the same time. And I guess I would encourage you to, you know, when we shared earlier about who's on the team, do you have a waiver team or whatever it is, that you insert yourself into that, or have conversations with your school building leadership, and bring these same pieces up. And I think Alyssa and Linda just got a person to help serve on their graduation pathways steering committee too. So
I mean, I would love to. I'm just, yeah, I do mean
to set my bounds, but I'm pretty sure they got you covered.
Yeah, and I would love to be part of that team. You know, but this is the first that I've heard from my district. We've heard a little bit of tidbits, but even talking to a counselor today, they're not knowledgeable of much of this. So, and one of my counselors I worked with today said she wasn't going to a meeting until next week about it. So I'm scared about how long this is going to take to become a process in our district. And
well, the good news though is that we're a couple months ahead of where we were a year ago. So
true.
The rules didn't come out until I think, was it late April or early May? So
yeah, I don't know.
Anyways, thank you very much, you guys. I truly appreciate this. This was very enlightening. Thank you.
Thanks for being here, Terry.
Make it a great night, Terry. Thanks.
Hi, sorry. Sorry.
Oh, Jamie, go ahead.
I'm sorry. And don't be mad at me, but I'm asking kind of the same question again. I just need to get complete and utter like clarification. Just because this has been like, I've had a lot of staff just kind of asking me, what's the state saying? What's the state saying? You know? And so I just want to make sure I understand and basically following the rules correctly. Because I also don't want kids to just like, I don't want to say to kids, oh, just apply to this community college and then give me that letter and then you're good to go, you know, for as far as meeting a requirement. So So if like I said, there are students, 3 students today who took the SAT because they literally have everything. They have all of their credits. They just need their grad pathway met. Because I think 2 or 3 of them, they did not meet their math requirement for grad pathway. So I told them, take the SAT. But now can I say to them, for the ones who, their grad pathway is like the 4-year route, okay, just apply to a community college and let's get your acceptance letter. And is that sufficient? Or, so that's the part where I'm getting hung up on, like I want to make sure I'm doing the right thing. I'm following the rules, but also not saying to all the kids, oh, just apply to the community college and you're fine. That's going to be your grad pathway is met.
Well, I want to say, I think you're conflating 2 different things here. So applying to community college would not meet your grad pathway, right? That's an example of demonstration of post-secondary preparation. Okay, just wanted to make sure we were good on that.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. Okay, awesome. But I would say that the demonstration of post-secondary preparation, it should follow the student's plan, right? So if they're planning to go to a 4-year route, then getting accepted in a community college probably isn't a good demonstration of post-secondary preparation for them. I think you're right. But again, State Board of Education rule is not exhaustive. If you can think as a district of other ways to truly assess the student is ready for their next steps in their high school and beyond plan that isn't in the examples in State Board of Education rule, that's okay. In fact, we encourage that. Your students better than we do. Possibly have thought of all of the examples of demonstration of post-secondary preparation and the very quick turnaround we had on these rules, right? So that's why we left it open to let you decide when a student is ready for their next steps.
Okay. And then
I was just going to ask. No, you're great because it's causing me to figure some stuff out in my head as well. And so I can ask a clarifying question of, they've met all their credit requirements, they haven't met the math requirements. That's why they took the SAT today, which is awesome. They've got plans to go on. They could have, in that student's case, and Alyssa and Linda, the student could waive the graduation pathway part, right?
And yes.
Correct. I mean, as long as the high school and beyond plan, they've got their 24, 25, 27, 28 credits, whatever it is.
And if they're,
you could waive the graduation pathway requirement, right?
Right. And if the student's intention is going on to a college or university, they probably have met their CATRs, their college distribution requirements. And we did include that as one of the demonstrations of preparation. So if they've met their CATRs, then you can waive their pathway and they're done.
So they're done and that's it. I guess probably make a note in their file just for purposes of, auditing reasons or anything like that.
Exactly.
Okay.
You would have to track the data, what Alyssa and Linda were sharing, and a couple of people had questions about, is there a template created yet to be able to, use or follow the data, but it'd be the student's name and some of the ethnicity and I'm sure free and reduced would be on there and some other pieces, and then what was waived. So yeah, that's all you have to do.
Okay, one more question and I'm done with questions. I'm sorry. So if there's a student who say they don't have all of their credits, but they are going to meet all of their credits by graduation timeframe, and it's the same, they have not met their math SBA. Say they did not take the SAT, they're not going to take the ACT, they're not going to take the ASVAB. Am I allowed to waive their grad pathway?
I think if you did everything you possibly could, you helped them figure out if SAT and ACT was available, you did all the things you could have to have helped them meet their graduation pathway, and they couldn't, yes, you can waive their graduation pathway.
So even if they refuse to take the SAT, ACT, ASVAB, I can still waive it?
I think so, if you've done everything you can from a district perspective.
Okay. Yeah, because this is now the second time that I've offered the SAT school administration And one of the students, he didn't come today. He didn't sign up for the SAT. I mean, he might sign up for the ASVAB. We'll see. So that's the part where I just want to make sure I'm doing everything right. I mean, obviously, I can't make a student show up for the SAT or ACT or any of those things. But I mean, we've offered it to the student, and they're going to, you know, finish out the 4 credits or however many credits they need to graduate in June. So I just want to make sure I can waive that grad pathway for them.
I think in a case like this, if it, if possible, just see what is that student's high school and beyond plan. If they want to go to a university, then they haven't taken the SAT, then that might be an indication that they're not ready for that next step. But if their goal is to go to a community or technical college, then maybe the logical thing would be for that student to apply to a community or technical college. And then that shows preparation for the next step.
Okay. Thank you.
Cool, thank you. Allowed greater understanding for all of us. So I so appreciate those questions.